I'm Anthony Leeds, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation, which will be with Professor John Nolan, who's at the South East Technology University in Waterford in the Republic of Ireland. John is an expert on the carotenoids, which play an important part in human nutrition, particularly at the back of the eye, and he's contributed extensively to the literature, which enables us to have some clues about how we might address a very serious condition which affects a high proportion of the elderly population, which is age-related macular degeneration. John, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. Perhaps we could begin. I think, first of all, we need to explain the role of these pigments, which are dietary pigments, although there's some metabolism of them that's involved, explain their role at the back of the eye, and then explain also what is the problem in age-related macular degeneration, what actually happens.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony, for having me back to this discussion and this particular program. As you say, my primary work for now nearly 25 years has been in the area of nutrition of the eye. My initial hypothesis for my PhD, which is actually behind me here, published in 2005, was a dissertation looking at age-related macular degeneration, the world's leading cause of blindness. But what we were interested in at that point was to try and identify if there were any modifiable risk factors or related risk factors that we could enhance to try and reduce the burden and risk of people developing this condition. And what became very clear even over 25 years ago was that while the established risk factors for macular degeneration, such as genetics, we know what those genetic risk factors are now, ARMS2, complement factor H, and age, they were two kind of established risk factors that were not modifiable for the patient. But modifiable risk factors for this condition included smoking cessation, and what became clear and important was that nutrition was an important risk factor. So ultimately, what we endeavoured to do was understand what elements of nutrition were really important in terms of the eye and this disease, macular degeneration. And very quickly, it became evident that nutrients called carotenoids, which are part of the Mediterranean diet, they're part of healthy foods, plant-based foods. We know that there's 700 carotenoids in nature. We know that an average human being consumes up to 50 of these carotenoids, albeit in very low amounts. And we see then within our biological systems, our blood system, so these are fat-soluble carotenoids, unlike the water-soluble. The process whereby they are transferred to target tissues such as the eye and brain is very kind of biologically programmed, and there's a lot to it. So from the 50 that we consume, there was around 18 in the blood serum, and we became very interested in the fact that 3 carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, and a very special carotenoid called mesozeaxanthin were found at the macula. So for your listeners and viewers, I'll tell them that the macula is just 4% of the retina, but it is the part of the back of the eye, it's the light receiving part of the eye, if you like, that converts that light signal into an electrical signal that the brain uses and thereafter gives us our vision. This 4% of that entire retinal tissue is responsible for all of our colour vision and mediates up to 90% of all our vision. So as a nutritional biochemist, when we saw that these 3 carotenoid pigments were highly concentrated at the macula, we were very sure that there was a very important role for these carotenoids. And essentially, we've spent the last 20 years trying to study these carotenoids in various population groups, patients with the disease macular degeneration, but also patients with other retinal diseases, and also, and importantly, people free of retinal disease. That's really where we believe optimizing these pigments are and will be beneficial for the future.
Good, thank you. So now another important consideration is the question of dietary availability. I remember hearing you say that the actual content of commercially produced vegetables doesn't contain as much of these carotenoids as it used to do, maybe 50 or 60 years ago. That's a problem. But secondly, one might have to go to particular sources to obtain, for example, mesozeaxanthin.
Correct. So it would be unwise of me not to lead my answer here by confirming the need for a healthy diet and a balanced diet, one that contains plant-based coloured fruits and vegetables. I also personally am a fan of protein, which we need, of course. But so I look at the global benefit of having a balanced diet. But in terms of the carotenoids, unfortunately, Anthony, we are not consuming anywhere near the amount of these nutrients. Two important points to make. One, the standard plate of vegetables and fruits that we would consume per day, even in a healthy individual, is in the region of about 1.5 to 2 milligrams of the eye carotenoids. Our data shows us that you need up to 20 milligrams of these carotenoids to optimize the biological systems, our blood system, and thereafter the reservoirs, which are the fatty tissues that store these carotenoids, where these carotenoids actually work for us inside our body. Remember, these carotenoids are not produced in our body, so we must consume them if they are to be beneficial for us. If we are to have them and thereafter to be beneficial. And you rightly point out that even if we are super good with our dietary patterns, there is this carotenoid called mesozeaxanthin, which is the main part of the macular pigments. It forms the center part of that jigsaw, if you like, of those three components: lutein, zeaxanthin. And what we know about this particular carotenoid is it is the most powerful carotenoid in terms of carotenoids are beneficial for us at the eye because they exhibit antioxidant properties, and they also filter light, particularly short wavelength blue light. Their peak absorption is at 460 nanometers. So if you think of a dual benefit of having the macular pigment carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin, and if you add to that the mesozeaxanthin allows that protective pigment do its job the best because it gives it the most potent antioxidant potential. And also from a light filtering capacity, which is crucial to the eye, we want to remove various wavelengths of light at the macula that cause visual confusions, visual distractions, when mesozeaxanthin is crucially important to that. Now, what we know is that we would consume more lutein than the other carotenoids, and we consume very little, if any, mesozeaxanthin. And for a lot of people, consuming lutein is okay because they can convert that lutein carotenoid to a mesozeaxanthin. And to be scientific for a second, that's simply just the transfer of a double bond in a hydroxyl group. If you the molecule is basically C40H56O2, so we've carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. The abundance of hydrogens makes it a powerful antioxidant, but we have this hydroxyl group at the end of the molecule, and simply lutein becomes mesozeaxanthin by moving one of those double bonds. It changes the configuration, and interestingly, this uniquely happens at the retina. We don't see mesozeaxanthin anywhere else in the body. So it's probably an evolution of vision whereby we identified the necessity to have mesozeaxanthin. So that's crucially important. But what we identified in some of our major research was that a significant percentage of the population, Anthony, are deficient in mesozeaxanthin. So when we profile and measure their pigments, instead of having the protective mountain, they have this kind of volcano, so this dip, this depression of pigment. And we hypothesized that that was due to a lack of mesozeaxanthin. Interestingly, when we gave those patients the lutein intervention, they did not accumulate mesozeaxanthin. So there seems to be an issue, if you like, in their ability to convert lutein to mesozeaxanthin. So in the second part of the experiment, we provided the mesozeaxanthin directly. And that was where we saw a rebuilding of that depression of that central dip into a normalized pigment protective profile. And this was a major discovery. And in fact, this was the discovery that I went to the European government, where I secured funding for the very famous central retinal enrichment supplementation trials, along with the support from the Heart Foundation UK, who thankfully supported many projects at our facility at the Nutrition Research Centre Ireland. This major work allowed us really prove that for patients with macular degeneration, providing a triple carotenoid intervention, lutein, zeaxanthin and mesozeaxanthin, adds significant benefit to their reducing their risk of the disease progressing, but also for your listeners and viewers who thankfully are free of retinal disease, if they want to do something that is just good for their vision and good for their eyesight, providing these 3 carotenoids early in our life is crucially important. And in fact, we see that a mother provides her baby with these nutrients from the cradle and onwards.
Yeah. So in terms of evidence, there's now very strong evidence from clinical trials that supplementation slows down the progress of the macular degeneration, and I think that's well established. However, it hasn't sort of filtered through into actual practice across the globe. There are 1 or 2 countries where there is interest. There are others where it doesn't seem to be taken up. What do you think is the problem there? Why does that not happen? Well, we've discussed this several times.
Yeah, that's why I'm smiling, because
why do you think this happens?
Are you sure you want my answer?
Yes, please.
so I joke, of course. No, and I just returned from France, where I was presenting at the International Ophthalmic Society meeting this weekend on the study of nutrition of the vitreous and the macula, which is my area of interest and specialty. And I had some very interesting discussion with medical ophthalmologists at that. And I would say that in terms of the normalization and use of using safe and tested and targeted supplementation into medicine, I think it's something that is very, very challenging. And one of the reasons for this is, if you look at medical ophthalmology across the world, it's a very busy and challenged environment where doctors have very little time to spend with their patients, and they also operate of what they call a standard of care. A standard of care, essentially in medicine, is the use of licensed treatment drugs for a particular condition, a decision based on a risk benefit and cost benefit of using that drug treatment for a patient. But ultimately, if you're to strip that back a bit, what we're saying is, even though an eye doctor may look at a patient's eye and see that they have the start of a disease like macular degeneration, unfortunately, the standard of care is to wait until that eye disease gets to a certain level. In other words, gets so bad that it merits pharmaceutical treatment. And that is just I call this health 2.0. My hope and my wish is that in concert and in collaboration, all levels of eye care professional and health scientists like myself can support the scientific and medical communities to understand that health 3.0, which I call this kind of preventative, getting in front of these diseases, is something that we must do. And it's something that I think, of course, you need buy-in from the medical professions, and we see this in optometry now, in the US particularly, where they're very proactive in the use of tested and safe supplementation for patients who want to optimize their vision and reduce risk of blindness. And they have very good working relationships with medical ophthalmology. Every country is different, every relationship is different, but we have a major challenge as well to have government identify the benefits to government and healthcare systems when they would simply make these type of nutrients available. Because unlike pharmaceutical drugs, which are very expensive to administrate and to source and to use, the use of targeted nutrition and supplementation is something that could be available and affordable for everybody in any part of the world. And I truly believe that.
Yeah. Now, what about people who've not yet developed age-related macular degeneration, but who, for a variety of reasons, suspect that they may be at risk, for example, through having a first-degree relative who has already developed the disease, so perhaps the children of people with AMD? What can they do? What should they do? And among those, how can you identify, and I suspect it's very difficult, how can you identify the individuals who may be at particular risk? Is it possible to do?
No, interestingly, that takes me back to my original dissertation, my own PhD, which was determinants of macular pigment in healthy subjects was that. But ultimately, what that meant was we were looking at individuals in society and we wanted to categorize their risk, their likelihood of developing macular degeneration. So we characterized them based on whether they smoked cigarettes, whether they had the family history, whether they were of a particular age, whether they had a level of obesity, etc., etc. And we mapped that against the measurement of the carotenoids, which I spoke about earlier. And it was very, very clear, Anthony, that the individuals in the high-risk category who are therefore going to get macular degeneration had this deficiency and lack of the macular pigments, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin. So you say it's difficult. It is to measure in some cases, but ultimately common sense related to these diseases would show us that if I'm in any way well worried because of macular degeneration, optimizing my macular pigment supplementation with tested and safe and stable carotenoids is something that I would recommend. But my message is quite different of late. I try to not speak about disease at all, or even risk of disease. I like to speak about vision. And I think in eye care, we should be very interested in vision. And I believe that if everyone and anyone wants to optimize their vision, we can do that now with these nutrients. And my discussion with the government in Brussels in 2011, when I won the CREST trial, my claim, if you like, was we can enhance vision now today for everyone in society, whereafter we will reduce the world's leading cause of blindness. So again, let's make vision good now. And if we do that, we'll have a positive impact on people's risk of macular degeneration.
Yeah. So that then brings us in the last few minutes to considering what you would ideally like to see happen. And I know that obviously with adequate funding, one will be able to go ahead and do various things. It's important that visual function is optimized, and that then relates to the question of what is actually measured in practice as to whether the right things are being measured. But also, do you think that people generally are informed enough to know how to protect their sight? So that comes, I remember a talk by a physicist at one of our conferences where he was explaining about in the urban environment, all the light is of course of the wrong wavelength, whereas if you're walking through a green field, of course it's much less potentially damaging to the eye. So there are all kinds of small behavioral changes that can be made to protect the eye. And there's other interesting areas, such as the issue of glare in older drivers, for example. There's been a lot of discussion in the UK recently about older people whose sight perhaps is not good enough for them to drive. And I know that glare can be a serious problem for older drivers. So what, given adequate resources and sufficient help, what would you like to see happen in relation to making things better generally?
You might be surprised with my answer. I mean, I think as researchers, we always talk about the next study and a bigger study. And of course, I'm committed to my responsibility in doing that. But I would say actually now, what I can do and what my colleagues can do, as you're familiar, we have this wonderful organization called the Brain and Ocular Nutrition. And we're running a conference in June 2025 in Boston, Endicott, for the Brain and Ocular Nutrition Conference scientists. So we're going to continue to develop the next phase of research that we want to do. You know, my own research, Anthony, has moved into visual performances for elite population groups and athletes and Olympic athletes and everyone and so on. So I want people to kind of listen to conversations like the one we're having. I want people to understand that there is a body of evidence out there that they can benefit from today. And I think we shouldn't always be waiting for the next trial. I'm very pleased to say that the Nutrition Research Centre Ireland that I work at, we're a very dynamic group. You've recently visited us and met a lot of the scientists and seen the enormous amount of work that we're doing, and we will be continuing to do. I'm also very pleased to say that hopefully this year we will be publishing a documentary on the whole idea around nutrition for the eye, and that we hope everyone can benefit. And maybe I'll come back to your show to discuss that documentary. And so I suppose what I'm saying is, I'm still very young and I still have a lot of work to do, and I'm really feel like we're at the beginning of a lot of that. But equally today we have something to say, because I'm very sure now, based on not just what we've seen in the scientific world, what we've seen, how that has been translated into clinical practice and benefit, it's very clear that we must do this. And I would say to everyone and anyone that's listening that wants to understand their eye function, and I would particularly speak to the medical practitioners that measure vision, they should measure vision differently to what they're currently doing. So we shouldn't just be doing visual acuities, which is very low sensitive measure of visual function. We're missing about 90% of the real world visual experience when we just work in black letters on a white background, 100% contrast. So measuring in clinic, we can measure contrast sensitivity. You can now measure skin carotenoids in the clinic, which we see happening now all over the world successfully. You know, I have a previous student of mine in Ghana, now a professor. Kwejo was established a kind of a center of excellence as well, where he has all of these technologies now as well in working in, you know, I've done projects in Mexico. So we've connected with the whole world where we're measuring these carotenoids, and we're getting very similar messages that they're very powerful micronutrients. So I'm very optimistic for the future. I think I have to work very hard also with education to disseminate this information. And I also have to do a lot of work maybe with the various governments when we look at supplements and when we look at, you know, how supplements end up in a pharmacy or in a doctor's practice, that there needs to be an improvement in the regulatory bodies that govern supplements in a way that doctors will have confidence. So they must look at programs like Supplement Certified, these quality programs which have now been developed to give doctors and patients confidence that there are benefits to taking the right, tested, safe and effective supplements.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, there's going to be a conference where the science will be reviewed in about a month's time, and we'd obviously welcome you back to talk about that, the exciting things that arise from that in the fullness of time. In the meantime, underneath this window on the screen, there is information which viewers can look at and web links to various sites and additional information. So at that point, may I wish you success at the conference. I hope it goes well. I hope people tend not to reveal too many exciting secrets at conferences, just throw around interesting ideas, don't they? But it would be interesting to hear what you have to say after the event. So thank you very much for talking to us today, John.
Thank you, Anthony. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.